Welcome in, latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. Go by SEC Mike on the Twitter machine. And there's our good friend, Steven Lassan, senior editor, Athlon Sports. Steven, have you survived the snowpocalypse?
I did. Mike, I have to tell you, I prepared. I did my game week preparation. I tried to go shopping 2 days before it hit. And I can tell you the crowds were insane. Everybody else had the same idea preparing for it, but we survived. And we've almost survived this college football season. We're down to just one game, of course, with the national championship. Although the real reason I wanted to come on your show tonight was to do a wellness check for you and just make sure that you and cousin Shay with no SEC, you guys are doing okay, right? We don't, we need to publicly talk through this.
It's that Big Ten podcast for at least today, because man, I don't even know if I'm going to watch this stupid national championship, Steven. 2 years in a row, first time since 2004, 2003. We've got 2 years without at least one SEC team in the national championship. I can't believe it.
We got to bow down to our new Big Ten overlords, right? That's the way this goes. I'll make a I don't know if it's a bold prediction. I think the SEC will be back in the championship game next year. I think all of the articles and shows writing off the SEC and saying this is the end of the conference feels like we've been here before. It's just certain teams. It's all cyclical. It's going to come back.
Yeah, and again, yeah, like Michigan last year was the champ, then they completely fell apart. So, I got a sense Ohio State's going to come back to reality pretty soon. And it'll be the SEC's world yet again. But until then, Steven, that's what we're going to do on this episode. We're going to look ahead. We've got national championship odds for each and every SEC team for next season. We've got we're going to do a big-time quarterback debate. So instead of just, I don't know if you recall this, Steven, but last year you jumped on the show and you basically gave out your quarterback rankings 1 through 16. We could still do that, but I thought it would be more fun to kind of go head to head with a lot of key quarterback battles, or not necessarily battles, but guys that are in similar situations or similar hype, or maybe transfers incoming, maybe playing for a new coordinator, and going head to head, so to speak, on who will be better next season. So we got a lot to get into. As always, we've got to remind the audience, Steven, that we're brought to you by MyBookie this football season. Football season is almost over, Steven. There's one more college game, of course. There's NFL playoffs. There's all the sports covered over at MyBookie. Promo code THAT, SEC, THAT, SEC, give you a 50% initial deposit bonus today over at MyBookie. And I don't even know, is that where we should go, Steven? Should we talk about the national championship game, or are we over college football for this year?
I think maybe we should talk about it first. That way we can get it kind of out of the system, right? Like, I know all the cousins, they want to hear some SEC talk. We just go and get that national championship game out of the way first. What do you say?
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Let's just do that, because it's two Northern teams, two Yankees. Unfortunately, one Yankee's got to win. Who do you think it'll be, Steve? Is it a foregone conclusion that Ohio State's going to win this thing?
I don't think it's necessarily a foregone conclusion. I think the matchups heavily favor Ohio State, though. I think for Notre Dame to win this game, I think they've got to make it sort of like an ugly, lower scoring game. They've got to force Ohio State to play kind of its style, which we've seen. If Ohio State gets ahead, I know it's like simplifying things. I think it's going to be hard for Notre Dame to come back. They're just really not built that way. I think Notre Dame can meet the moment like in a physical sense, because we saw what they did to Georgia and Penn State. They've played physical games. I just think that this Ohio State team looks like they're on a different level. And unless Notre Dame can drag them down to a low possession 20-17 kind of game, it's hard to envision them winning. It's hard to find an area where they have an edge, frankly, because I don't see them being able to just line up and run it against Ohio State. And certainly I think Ohio State's passing game is probably due for a big play or two after not really hitting on those outside of that screen pass against Texas. So I guess all that to be said, Mike, I think Notre Dame can make it a game, but they've got to find a way to win the style because they really don't match up great against Ohio State in that regard.
Right. But they have been picked against even each of the last two rounds, and they keep finding a way. They're scrappy. Maybe they'll bring in Rudy for the if that guy's still alive. I have no idea. Maybe they'll bring him in for a pregame speech or something. Luck of the Irish. I don't know. Fingers crossed that they can get it done. I'm just hoping for a competitive ball game because you're right. I mean, I get the spread and it makes all the sense in the world. Hell, I thought even Texas played close to as well as they possibly could, minus 2 plays, 2 massive plays. But rule those out, and I think Texas would have beat them the other day, and a lot of that had to do with Ohio State kind of beating itself.
Yeah, penalties huge for Ohio State in that first half, and really throughout the game, kind of slowed themselves down. I think to your point on Texas, like they did, Texas pass rush, especially in the second half and late in the first half, kind of stepped up and we're starting to get pressure on Will Howard, like especially after that first drive. Because I thought once Ohio State went down and scored, I was like, oh no, here we go again. Rose Bowl part 2. Ohio State's just going to steamroll Texas. But credit to Texas. Like once they settled in, it turned into a kind of a pretty even matchup. And unfortunately for Texas, those big plays, like all of the big plays in the game went against Texas, whether it was the Henderson screen pass, it was Caleb Downs, like shooting through the line of scrimmage to stop Texas on the toss play. And then, of course, Jack Sawyer in his touchdown run at the end of the game. So Notre Dame, I think, as you mentioned, luck of the Irish, they need some breaks. I don't think they can just physically say, even matchup. The talent is clearly on Ohio State's side. The matchups favor them. They're going to need to win turnovers. They're going to need to get a little fortunate. I think that's a lot to ask against this Ohio State team, given the way Ohio State's played this year. Last couple of weeks, I should say.
Hey, you just made me think of something, but real quick, as always, we got to shout out Cousin JR, the legend, the most loyal cousin there is. He just gifted a membership, Steven, this time to Joshua. Joshua, welcome to the family. Thanks to Cousin JR. We appreciate you, buddy. But what is stopping someone from reaching out to Caleb Downs, a.k.a. the one that got away for Alabama, Georgia, probably a litany of others. If I'm an SEC team, if I'm Georgia, maybe even Alabama, Tennessee, what have you, LSU, you're I don't think any of them, as good as those rosters are, have a player as good as Caleb Downs. Why not offer him $4 or $5 million? I mean, there's nothing stopping him from doing that, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you're Caleb Downs, or Jeremiah Smith, wouldn't your best play every offseason would be to enter the transfer portal and use that as leverage to see how much you could get? I don't think necessarily these players would do it, but if I was that good, maybe I would be open to the highest bidder in that regard. We have seen that to some extent. You look at what Cam Ward and also Carson Beck too this year, using the NFL draft as leverage to get Miami to pay large amounts of cash to come and play quarterback this year. So yeah, I mean, I think if you're a player and you want to, use that as leverage, you could. Caleb Downs, I think, might be the best defensive player coming back in the country next season. Certainly, if he's not number 1, he's got to be number 2 or number 3. So if he was to enter the portal, I don't think he will. He would have like several suitors that like Texas, Georgia, all the high profile teams would be throwing lots of cash his way for sure.
Yeah. And again, so we only got one more game. So I want to give a shout out to Prize Picks, has been with us all season long for 4 seasons in a row now. If you haven't already, head on over to prizepicks.com, put in that promo code SEC, play 5, get 50 instantly for daily fantasy sports. We love it. It's not just college football, but we obviously highlight that for a reason. And look at this one, Steven. They're giving free pick away essentially for the national championship game. If Ohio State quarterback Will Howard has a single passing yard, you win over at Prize Picks. So that is obviously a given. And if you're unfamiliar with Prize Picks, you need 2 to cash out and win. And if you do up to, I believe it's 6, you multiply your winnings each time. So I wanted to throw a couple your way just real quick here. So Will Howard, that's an obvious one because it's only 1 passing yard. What about Jeremiah Smith? More than, less than, or more than 80.5 receiving yards against Notre Dame. Where would you go there with Jeremiah Smith?
Statistically, I think the best route on that one is the less than side of that, Mike. But this is sort of like, I'm going to take bounce back plus talent, and Notre Dame does play a lot of man coverage. They may not try to do the same thing Texas did. So I would take I would just bank on He was too quiet last time. He's bound to have a breakout. I would take the more than side almost just because of a gut feel.
Mm-hmm. All right. How about Notre Dame quarterback Riley Leonard? 167 and a half pass yards, more than less than 167 and a half pass yards.
Man, that's a tough one because I don't see Notre Dame hitting on many big plays. I'd probably take the less than side of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think their passing game is much more efficiency based than big plays. So I
Right.
would take less than on that one.
And then one final one, Jeremiah Love, outstanding running back. I've only watched him 2 or 3 times, but he looks good in those games. More than, less than 41 and a half rushing yards against Ohio State.
That's man. He had 46 or so against Penn State, and he's been hurt too. So I would be bold and probably take the less than side of that. I think injury plus Notre Dame's offensive line being banged up plus the Ohio State defense being really, really good against the run. I would take less than, I think.
So less than on all the Notre Dame guys, more than on Ohio State. I think we know where Steven's going with this one.
Yeah. I think if you haven't picked up by now, I'm taking the Buckeyes to win the national championship on January 20th.
Hey, shout out Cousin Thomas. He just gave us $10, Steven. The Texas team is must-see TV next year. Dual threat Manning with potentially the 2 best defensive players in the country, Colin Simmons and Anthony Hill. We appreciate you, Cousin Thomas. So that's a perfect segue to next season, Steven. Oh wait, real quick before we get to next season, did you come up with a final top 25 for 2024? Because there's obviously only 2 teams remaining, and I would assume they're kind of 1-2. Is that right, or do you have it a little different?
Yeah, it is. I think I've got Ohio State and Notre Dame 1 and 2 in my final rankings. To be honest with you also, Mike, I did not penalize the teams in the playoff a ton if they lost. I felt like if you made it that far, not going to drop you a ton. So I'll throw out my top 10. I'd love to get your feedback on it. I've got Oregon at 3. They were undefeated in the regular season. They met the unstoppable force known as Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. So I dropped them to 3. I went Georgia, Texas 4 or 5, Penn State at 6. I went Tennessee 7, Indiana 8, Arizona State 9, and also Boise State 10 with Ole Miss at 11.
Steven, it's too early to be drinking this. If you're going to have Boise State ahead of Ole Miss, of course, Ole Miss would be widely favored, so they'd probably lose it. So you're probably 100% right. But man, I'm not even like an Ole Miss homer guy, but I feel like for the next 50 years, unless they win a national championship, they're going to be sitting around thinking, how do we blow this season when we had all this talent, we had everything in front of us? And I mean, it's a sign of times that Ole Miss is winning 10 football games, and I'm saying it was a disaster. But that's basically what it was with these 3 tough losses. So I can't really even bicker with you. I think Ole Miss probably, borderline top 5 team. Borderline. Probably will not give them that much credit, but 6, 7 is probably where they belong. But technically, they don't belong because they lost all these games that they shouldn't have lost. So, yeah, I guess I can't bicker with any of those. It's pretty interesting. You got Georgia over Texas. I agree with that because Georgia beat Texas twice. But if they were to face on a neutral field, which is not the same thing as rankings, I'd probably pick Texas. Hell, I did it twice last year, and I was proven wrong each time. So take that for what it's worth. But, yeah, that's a weird one, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it's also hard now, of course, with different quarterback, Gunnar Stockton. Like if they played tomorrow, like maybe you think Texas would finally get over the hump in that game, especially with the different quarterback. On Ole Miss, one thing I looked at, and I'm sort of trying to guess like how the final AP poll is going to play out here too. But Boise State was 9, Ole Miss was 14. I don't think Boise State's going to drop that far. If you ask me who the better team is, I don't think it's in a debate. I think it's Ole Miss, no question about it. Mike, to your point, I was just thinking about this, like where on a neutral field I would probably rank Ole Miss, this team at its best this season. And Tennessee at 7 and Penn State at 6. It feels like they should be right there in that conversation. Like it feels very much a missed opportunity given the offensive and defensive ability when Ole Miss played at its best. That Kentucky loss will probably forever haunt this Ole Miss team.
And that's why we call him Lane Whiffen on this show till further notice. You know what?
What's the best way Lane Kiffin could get rid of the Lane Whiffen thing? It would be like next year if they run the table to the playoff, and I kind of thought maybe it would be retired after Georgia, but I guess you can't if you.
Well, let's see. Let's throw up our schedule for next season. I mean, there's some tough games here, certainly, but they're going to be favorites in a lot of these games. Aside from at Georgia, they'll be massive underdogs. LSU at home, I would assume they're favored, but they may not be. That may be a toss-up. If let's say if they win at Georgia, automatically he's no longer Lane Whiffen. I will remove it if they make the college football playoff. How about that? Because again, with the talent's not going to be the same, but if they can win some of these one-score games that they could not do last year, they could have a better record, which is crazy to say because the team won't be as good. But that's the reality of college football.
You know what's interesting, and I'm thinking about this as I look at the Ole Miss schedule is there are teams that when everything seems to be aligned for them the one year and they don't get there, it's often the next year that things work out in some weird way. Like Ole Miss, maybe it's like this 2024 didn't work out, but the schedule plus the what they bring in through the portal and what they have coming back on the roster. I mean, sure that there are some landmines on that schedule, especially when you talk about going to Georgia, you go to Oklahoma, but you also get Florida, South Carolina, and LSU at home. So 3 of their tougher games are going to be in Oxford. And if you only lose to maybe Georgia and Oklahoma and you can sweep the home slate, you're talking about being 10-2, and that probably gets you in the playoff next year. So the door should be wide open again, despite tough landmines on the schedule and also a very significant roster overhaul.
How high? I know this was way too far away, and I didn't even prepare you for this or anything, but LSU at Ole Miss, how high theoretically does that rank on key games in the SEC next season for Steven Lassan? Because it seems like that's a do or die game for really both these programs.
Oh, no question. Like it's not only important for just like positioning within the SEC college football playoff, but the narratives, from for Brian Kelly, for Lane Kiffin early, in the season to into September, you kind of know enough about your team. You're on the road if you're LSU, you're Ole Miss at home. If you're Ole Miss and win that game, it's like a huge statement that this program has staying power regardless of who we lost. And if you're LSU, you could say, hey, if we go on the road and beat Clemson in week 1 and we beat Ole Miss on September 27th, you're talking about like 2 top 15 wins in there. And all of a sudden, maybe LSU goes into October with a lot of momentum, potentially at that point, I would think in the top 5 or so type teams in the country. So I think it is very high in the list, not only for intrigue, but narrative, like season long kind of importance for both teams.
Yeah. And I apologize. We skipped ahead a little bit, but so back to your final top 25, you got Ole Miss 11. Who you got after that?
Yeah. Got SMU at 12, Alabama 13, Illinois 14, South Carolina 15. Largely Illinois beat them in the bowl game. I don't put a ton of stock, but they were close enough in the regular season in the rankings. I think that the voters will probably put Illinois ahead of South Carolina. I got Clemson 16, 1 spot behind South Carolina, respecting the head-to-head. I'll go Iowa State 17, Miami 18, BYU 19, Missouri 20, Army 21, Colorado 22, Syracuse 23, Memphis 24, and LSU at 25.
Ooh.
With A&M and Florida and Vanderbilt just outside the top 25.
So Brian Kelly, he gets some kind of bonus because he's made Steven's top 25 to end the year. Congratulations. Came down here to win a natty. You're 25th in the country while your former team's in the playoff. But How about Alabama? Pardon me if I'm wrong. You say Alabama between SMU and Illinois in the final standings?
Yeah, Alabama. So Alabama was 11th in the committees,
Mm-hmm.
final rankings, and 11th in the Associated Press poll. You know, it's a tough one. I could see them being penalized a little bit more because of the loss to an unranked Michigan team in the bowl game. Still, though, you know, 9 wins. You know, some pretty good wins, including Georgia. So I don't want to say they would drop too far, I guess, in the final rankings.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm not critiquing it, Stephen, but I just want to soak that in for a minute. After years and years of being under Bama's thumb, we all were. Everybody in this conference for 20 years, and now, they hire this guy. Apparently, he's better than Saban. They were saying after the Georgia game, and yet they finished between SMU and Illinois. Burt
Oh,
Bielema.
Burt, yeah.
God. That better never happen again for old DeBoring. Otherwise, he's going to be back to. They don't have the Pac-12 anymore, but whatever the equivalent of that is, we got to send him back there. You know what? Do I lose you, Stephen?
I think we got jammed up there for a second.
Okay.
That might have maybe the rankings were so hot that they scalded the internet. So, sorry about that. So, or that or Burt came in was providing interference over here because we were talking about Illinois. I think back to the bowl game.
Yeah, well, it was old Bielema. He was doing a substitution. It was just going to take about 30 minutes for his guys to run on and off the field, which apparently Tennessee tried to do that at Georgia, and the refs said, no, we're not having that yet. I don't know. That's neither here nor there. But, hey, speaking of that, Stephen, let's transition to national championship odds. These have just been released, not for obviously the upcoming game because it's Ohio State, Notre Dame. To hell with that. We're talking next season, 2025. These just came out red hot from FanDuel. Georgia and Texas tied. We're just doing SEC. I don't care about the rest of them. Georgia and Texas 6.5 to 1 to win the national championship. Is that what's your thoughts on Texas and Georgia being tied at 6.5 to 1?
That makes a ton of sense because honestly, as I'm putting together my early top 25 for next year, those two are the top two SEC teams, and I'm struggling to figure out who I like more at this point. And both teams have a lot of changes for next year. Texas is losing quite a few players we've seen early to the NFL. Georgia's receivers plus offensive line plus how does Gunnar Stockton develop? Definitely some questions on both teams, but also bank on talent. And both of those teams should lead the way after playing in the SEC championship game this year.
Mm-hmm. And everybody is assuming, which is a safe assumption, that'll be Old Arch. But are there any odds? Because again, nobody, well, I shouldn't say nobody, but Carson Beck going to Miami. When he declared for the NFL draft, I would assume most people just close the door on Carson Beck coming back for another season at any school. And we've had Quinn Ewers kind of come out and say, I'm going pro. Or he didn't say that. He just says my last year in college. And again, if he gets some kind of wild offer, whether it be Georgia, Alabama, Notre Dame, Oregon, on and on and on. If somebody offers him or someone else, I guess what I'm really trying to get at here, any shot in your mind that Georgia, after failing to win a national championship 2 years in a row, they look around and say, let's go spend a couple $1 million on a quarterback that we feel can get us over the top?
It's a really interesting debate. If I'm Georgia, I don't know that I necessarily need to go out and get a quarterback. I think sometimes the breadcrumbs almost lead us to like an answer because I don't remember seeing Georgia overly active in this portal window to try to find somebody over Gunnar Stockton. That probably tells me they feel pretty good about him. Now, you could look at the quarterbacks in the portal and you kind of knew where some of them were going. You could also look and say maybe none of them fit what Georgia wanted. But I think Georgia probably should feel pretty good about Gunnar Stockton. I know it's a small sample size. I think the interesting thing on Quinn Ewers, and the door is still open until it's officially closed, is
Right.
that teams like Oregon, Ohio State loses Will Howard, they feel pretty good about Julian Sayin, but Quinn Ewers may be a third, fourth round pick in the NFL draft. That's the same thing that Carson Beck probably was evaluating when he decided to transfer to Miami. Is that is the value of being a mid round pick better than going to college for one more year and making $3 to $4 million. And I think it's an interesting debate if you're Quinn Ewers. So until that door is closed, I'm sure some of these teams like an Ohio State, an Oregon, or Georgia, if they think they need one, are probably going to feel things out to see if Ewers actually has any interest.
Yeah, and I didn't realize this was even up for debate. I think it's just trolls having a good troll time. But Texas people or anti-Texas people are saying Sark to the NFL in the comments. I had not. I mean, I had kind of. I've heard those rumors, but if that happens, buddy, does Arch jump in the portal?
Oh, buddy.
What's he worth, and where could he go? I would imagine he'll wait it out, see who they hire. But knowing the Mannings, they're not going to just make a rash decision here. But talk about would he be the hottest free agent maybe ever?
Oh, no question. I think first of all, there has been some chatter about Sark in the Cowboys job, and it's coming from NFL writers mostly.
Mhm.
So we'll see about that. Certainly, I think coming up with the job opening officially in Texas, not having a season, it's definitely time for any college coaches to jump on the radar. So definitely something to watch. If Arch entered the portal, I would imagine that he probably commands more than Carson Beck, right? I mean, I think Carson Beck way more proven, but man, he's got a ton of upside. And I'm guessing the suitors would probably be like Georgia and Alabama. Just too talented to, even if like you feel good about Gunnar Stockton and Keelan Russell and Ty Simpson for next year. I think if Arch hit the portal, the list of suitors probably starts with SEC teams. Is that fair?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. A lot of these teams are very eager to get in, I would think, to jumpstart. All right. So next team on the docket though, 14-1, Alabama to win the next national championship. Do you take any issue at all with Alabama being having the third best odds to win the national championship out of the SEC?
I think that's a little high for me. Personally, I'll probably have Alabama a little bit lower than third. I think when you look at this team, a lot of questions about the quarterback spot coming into next year. Also, defensively, they should be very good with the amount of returners they're going to have and guys that have turned down the NFL. The other thing is, I think when we get into this middle tier, these teams all feel very close to me. So it feels a little high, but also at the same time, a lot of these teams are going to be grouped, I imagine, very close together.
Mm-hmm. All right, and then this one was kind of surprising to me, but maybe I'm just a fool, which I kind of am. Tennessee 16-1, Stephen, fourth best odds out of the conference to win the national championship. Am I off my rocker thinking Tennessee's going to take a step back?
I think that's a little high, honestly. I think Tennessee is still a playoff contender. But I think when you start looking at this team for next year, there's a lot of pieces that are departing. And it's going to be really heavy and incumbent on Nico to take that big step forward. So the team around him, you could argue, is going to be a lot more inexperienced, which is going to require the quarterback to take a big step forward. Tennessee's probably somewhere in that 3 to 8 range. They all feel very close to me, but I think I would have Tennessee probably down a few spots, I think, instead of the fourth best odds.
Mm-hmm. And then next, 19-1, them Ole Miss Rebels we just talked about, Steve. So better than 20-1 odds for Ole Miss. I think this is, the Rebels getting some respect for being so consistent the last 3 or 4 years in the conference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also a lot of just trust that Lane Kiffin is going to be able to fill those voids from the transfer portal again. I think, he's bringing in an outstanding transfer class. And so I think you sort of just trust that, hey, this program has been consistently right there, double-digit victories the last 2 years. They can do it again despite the personnel losses. But also, this probably works in favor of Tennessee too. The schedule Also, for Ole Miss and for Tennessee, there's definitely you can see the path there. That's a little bit more favorable than some of the other teams in the conference.
Mm-hmm. And then next on the docket would be LSU, Stephen, 23-1. Meanwhile, Notre Dame is high on up the list. Brian Kelly, what are we doing here? 23-1. We got to do better odds than that, I feel like.
Man, the schedule definitely is tough. At Clemson, at Alabama, at Ole Miss, at Oklahoma. They're winnable, but definitely some really difficult road games for LSU. I will go ahead and I'll just say this. I'm buying some stock in LSU next year. I think Garrett Nussmeier coming back is huge. I love the pickups of Barry and Brown and Nick Anderson in the transfer portal. Brought in a couple guys on the offensive line too. And I think their defense will take a step forward in Blake Baker's second year. So maybe the odds are low because of the difficult schedule, but I think I feel honestly better if you gave me $100 and you told me like my bookie's got all these great odds for the 2025, I actually probably would take LSU as kind of my maybe not the outside the top 3 or so. They'd be my favorite of these picks.
Yeah, maybe your top sleeper.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good way to put it.
How about A&M next on the docket? 32-1 odds to win the national championship. Are you a believer in Mike Elko and company?
I am. I think that this team will only continue to get better under Mike Elko. And, for some of the reasons that you and I talked about a couple weeks ago, which is big time portal additions at receiver, plus the growth of Marcel Reed at quarterback. Like much like Nico, it is incumbent on Marcel Reed to take that step forward. Some defensive concerns, defensive line's got to be restocked, got to get better in the secondary. Of course, they have to go to Texas. They have to go to Notre Dame. They have to go to LSU. So this is not easy, but I will be buying some stock in Mike Elko next year.
And then next we got the the bowl game. Red Hot Gamecocks, 38-1 odds. I think a lot of this got to do, obviously, with LaNorris Sellers coming back and Dylan Stewart, maybe the best offensive player, maybe the best defensive player in the entire SEC or South Carolina Gamecocks next season. How about that, Stephen? 38-1 odds to win it all.
Seems kind of low to me. It's always hard to pick up where you left off in one season into the next. But I think there's also a lot of reason to think that South Carolina can, just because they have the quarterback and they've been able to kind of fortify some of these positions in the portal, whether it was last year, this year. Shane Beamer's teams tend to get better as the season goes along. So yeah, the schedule's pretty challenging. There's LSU, Vanderbilt, Missouri, Alabama, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Clemson. It's very difficult, but also I think LaNorris Sellers is one of those players that can also carry this team into the SEC championship.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of carrying to the SEC championship, a man I don't believe he's ever been. Hugh Freeze, come on down, 50-1 to not to win the SEC, to win it all. Stephen, is this a year everything clicks for the Tigers of the Plains?
I like Auburn to be better. I think it might be too optimistic to think national championship next year. Obviously, the biggest intrigue for this team is Jackson Arnold and just how he fits, how good he is. But I will take Auburn to be better, but I will be passing on the 50-1 odds.
Okay. How about this ultimate wild card? Florida, also 50-1. So Auburn and Florida are technically tied. I just went in alphabetical order there. And I'm not saying Florida should be predicted to win it all. But I guess I'll just continue to keep saying the same thing. If DJ Lagway continues to progress, and I'm not guaranteeing he's the best quarterback in the SEC next season, but if he is, I like Florida to be a dark horse here.
Same here, Mike. I think Florida is probably too low at 50-1. I certainly like them better than Auburn. I think the other side of this is, if you're from an odds standpoint, just the schedule, if you're trying to get to the playoff when you have road games against Miami, LSU, A&M, Ole Miss is really difficult. And not to mention, you still got to play Georgia. So the schedule is really tough. But at the same time, I think, and again, it is always difficult to pick up where you left off, but Lagway's development plus a much improved defense, to me, I think Florida kind of is a pretty good sleeper pick in that discussion.
How about, man, it's weird to see them this far down the list, but I think personally, it's accurate. 75-1 Oklahoma Sooners. Too high, too low, or just about right?
Feels probably maybe it's maybe a little high. We haven't gotten to Missouri yet. I could maybe see Missouri having better odds, but this team will go as John Mateer goes next year. It is a crucial year for Brent Venables. The schedule is incredibly difficult. Mateer's got to be good. I think Oklahoma's a long shot, but they're probably right there in that kind of third tier of contenders.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of Mizzou, here they are at 100-1. So one of the worst odds. Their fans are over the moon, Stephen. They're I don't know if they're even watching anymore because I put them 12th in the power rankings here, but they're that upset. But again, 100-1 odds not to win the SEC, to win the national championship. A lot of question marks, but they've been the last 2 years arguably third or fourth most consistent program in the entire SEC. How do you feel about Missouri 101 to win it all?
I think they're a little low, to be honest with you. I know there are some questions here. First of all, how good is Bo Prabula at quarterback? You're losing somebody like Brady Cook, senior leadership. Luther Burden was a special player. Missouri's got a lot, no doubt about it. The schedule, though, also sets up pretty favorably. And I think if I'm looking for bets like in the middle tier to the back half of the conference, I always like favorable schedules. And I just look at Missouri and see, there's no Texas, there's no Georgia, there's no Tennessee, there's no Ole Miss. So, and also some of those tougher games are at home. So I think Missouri's maybe a little underranked, I guess, in these odds.
Mm-hmm. And now we get to Arkansas, Stephen, 110-1. Again, to win it all here. Again, we're getting into the highly unlikely, but if they have the best quarterback in the entire conference next year, and I'm not guaranteeing that they do, but if they do, they've got a puncher's shot to at least make the playoff.
Yeah, this much like we talked about with John Mateer at Oklahoma, Bo Prabula at Missouri, Taylon Green at Arkansas, super important. Like, can he elevate Arkansas? They have some concerns personnel-wise. They're losing a lot to the portal, bringing in a lot from the portal. He's going to have to raise his game to raise Arkansas to that next level. And the schedule is tough. You get Notre Dame in non-conference play, Tennessee, A&M, Auburn, LSU, Texas, Missouri, Ole Miss, I'm sure are all top 25 teams. So that seems about right for me for Arkansas.
And someone was asking about Kentucky. Is it 1,000,000-1? It is not 1,000,000. It's 210-1 to win the national championship. Does that feel about right, or too high, too low?
That probably feels a little too high at this point for Kentucky. I mean, the schedule, obviously you get Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, Florida, those, and Ole Miss, South Carolina. That's pretty difficult. Unless Kentucky's going to roll out a much improved offense, I think that's probably a little too high.
Yeah. And then maybe the best value, again, not saying they're going to do it, but they're all the way down here. I think just based on brand alone, 460-1. I don't know how they come up with these odds, Stephen. 460-1 to win it all. Vanderbilt Commodores. The disrespect is real.
I think that's about as many yards as Pavia had against Alabama, right? That's disrespectful to Vanderbilt, man. They are a much improved team with Diego Pavia leading the way. I would not bet against Diego Pavia, but Vanderbilt, probably fair to say they should have long odds to win the national championship next year.
Right. And then last, and in this case least, I mean, I'm trying to be as kind as I can here. Let's see, Mississippi State, 1,000-1 odds to win it all. Steve, would you be bold enough to put $1 on Mississippi State to win it all, or do you not like burning money?
I don't like burning money, Mike, so I think I'm going to hold off on that. I would be curious, like, what kind of odds you could get on Mississippi State making a bowl game next year, because I do think they're going to be better. And you look at that, start to the season, you get Arizona State at home, you get Northern Illinois. They have been a giant killer. They beat Notre Dame this year. So, I could see them starting maybe 4-0 if things break right. They're going to have to find an upset or two in SEC play to probably get bowl eligible. But I would encourage probably not wasting your money on that, and maybe finding some other like in-season win total props you could use for Mississippi State instead.
All right, so let's be a little bit optimistic here for State. Let's say I'm guaranteeing you this happens, and I realize it's maybe unlikely, but I'm guaranteeing you that they win the first 4 games, which is at Southern Miss, Arizona State at home, Alcorn at home, and Northern Illinois all at home. So we're 4-0 right out the gate, and then we got 8 straight conference games mixed in with 2 byes. What's the likelihood State goes to a bowl game if I'm guaranteeing you that they're going to go 4-0 in the non-conference?
Man, I'm honestly, and this is early, I am having trouble finding 2 wins in SEC play.
Yeah.
I think they can get to 1. I think the other is going to hinge on some sort of upset. So I don't like their odds. I like them to be much better, but I'm really having a hard time finding 2 wins in there. That's probably 7 of their 8 conference games being against preseason top 25 or top 30 teams next year. That's really tough.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was trying to be optimistic, and you just crapped on my dreams there, Steven, as you so frequently do, but that's all right.
5-7 would be a good step forward, right? I like their portal class, by the way. I like the quality and the depth that they've brought in, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So I think there's definitely some reasons to be optimistic next year at Mississippi State.
Well, another reason to be optimistic, Steven, if you are a State fan, we're going to hook you up. Go on over to cornbreadhemp.com right now. Promo code SEC. Get you 30% off any first-time order over at cornbreadhemp.com. What is this cornbread? America's only USDA organic THC gummy. And they also have the outstanding sleep CBD gummies. We had Brodo up in here. He said his gummy just kicked in, so I don't even know if he's still alive over there. But this is 100% legal hemp. Fast and free shipping. You know, if you're taking a dry January like me, no alcohol, things of that nature, get you some cornbread hemp. You will not be disappointed. Love this company, small business out of the state of Kentucky. Cannot recommend it enough. And again, you get 30% off any first-time orders over at cornbreadhemp.com with that promo code SEC, or just type in cornbreadhemp.com/SEC and they'll hook you up. Cannot recommend this stuff enough, and it's going to be a long off season, Steven. If you take enough of these, you might not wake up till football season. I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just saying that could happen.
Skipping ahead to next football season always sounds pretty good sometimes, doesn't it? It is nice to have a little bit of an off season to recharge. What fan base could use the most cornbread hemp so far this offseason in your in some of your power ranking shows? I'm curious as to like which fan base is the most angry and could use them so far. We haven't like begun 2025 discussion yet either. So
I think it's Oklahoma, Steven, and here's one thing I was kind of blown away. Not judging, just blown away. But I've been to Norman twice now. There is about, rough estimate, 20 marijuana shops or dispensaries all littered around their campus. I didn't even know that was legal out there. More power to them. But I thought I was in Austin there for a second with, you pull up, you're a mile away from campus. It's weed store. Everywhere you look is a freaking weed store. So I think they're making the most of it there in Oklahoma. They got to be on something to be optimistic about the current direction of the program, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was going to say that the location of those shops could come in very handy next year if Oklahoma struggles in SEC play. So I was that or Kentucky, our good friends at Cornbread Hemp based in Kentucky with a long off season and the offensive concerns going into next year. So, man, between the all Big Ten championship and some of these questions, I guess there's a lot of need for this.
Well, all right, Steve, now's the time to mix it up. We put this in the title. This is where I wanted to go for this entire show. We've delayed long enough. Quarterbacks, picking between them. And again, I tried my best to kind of match. If you said Arch Manning versus Bo Pribula, I mean, unless you're a diehard Missouri fan, you're going to pick Arch Manning, right? So, I mean, I thought that was foolish. So here's how I tried to pair them up one by one. Let's go Arch Manning. Let's go Nico. And why am I going with those two? Because they were in the same recruiting class. They were 5 stars. They're at UT respectively, each their own, in a offensive minded system of a head coach. A lot of promise, a lot of hype, and a lot of people. I can't believe that this is where we're at in this sport, Stephen. Where if Nico, you make the college football playoff, he's a complete bust. That's like, but that's where we're at. So I don't know that anybody can ever match the hype of Arch. They're already swearing allegiance to the next Manning, that he's the best player in the country, even though he wasn't good enough to start this year. So where would you go? And again, this is just next year. I'm not asking NFL. I'm not asking 2 years from now, 3 years from now. I'm saying 2025. Who's the better quarterback? Arch Manning at Texas, Nico at Tennessee.
I'm going Arch Manning.
Get out of here, Steven. You're fired. I never hired you, but you're fired.
This is tough. I think but my first thought on all the quarterbacks in the SEC next season, Mike, is like, man, this is a really good year for quarterbacks. And I think some of these debates are hard, but I'm going to take upside for Arch here. And certainly I think Nico, and maybe I'm guilty of this too, like expectations sky high this season, that being 2024. I think he will get better in 2025. And I think you kind of saw that down the stretch a little bit. Some of his, only 9 touchdowns in SEC play, but also had 8 in the season against Vanderbilt and UTEP, which came late in the year. So I think some signs of progress. He also averaged 11.1 on his average depth of target, which only Jackson Dart, DJ Lagway, and Michael Van Buren were the only ones who were full-time quarterbacks ahead of him. So some of the underlying metrics on Nico are actually really good. But I think Arch Manning is potentially a first-team All-America type quarterback next year. I am buying the hype. Give me Arch Manning over Nico.
Okay. You're wrong, but okay. How about this one, Steve? This will be a lot of fun. This is kind of the whole concept I wanted with these guys. LaNorris Sellers versus DJ Lagway, and it's a shame they're not facing off against each other. South Carolina and Florida. In my mind, that's an SEC game we need annually. I'll never understand why that didn't make the rotation in these 2 years, but that's neither here nor there. Maybe they'll meet in the SEC championship. LaNorris Sellers or DJ Lagway, who's better next year?
Man, I wrestled with this one. I'm not even sure I feel great about my answer. I'm going to go DJ Lagway. I'm going to go with the upside here. I think his upside is a little bit higher than Sellers, not by much. They're both really good. They're both probably top 10 quarterbacks to start next season. I think if I'm critiquing my pick of DJ Lagway, I think the interceptions are too high. 9 in a small, not necessarily a small sample size, but as a part-time starter, I would like to see that be a little bit lower. I also think just from a, what does Mike Shula do as offensive coordinator for South Carolina, as opposed to there's a little bit more continuity on Florida's staff right now. So no wrong choice here, but I'm going to take DJ Lagway.
Was any of that the fact that would your answer be different? I guess is a better way to ask it. If Dow Loggins for sure was coming back and they kept that continuity on the offensive coordinator in Columbia, would that change your answer at all?
Potentially, yeah. I think that the element of coordinator change is always the great unknown, and I think Shula's experience as a play caller makes me think that's probably going to be pretty seamless. But every time I watched DJ Lagway this year, and especially late in the season when they played like Ole Miss and LSU, and he was hitting on those big plays, and he was making throws with dudes hanging off of him, and keeping Florida's winning streak alive late. You kind of saw, and I hate to go there, it's like, number 1 pick potential of the NFL draft. So like I said, Mike, it's really close. I could be convinced one way or the other. I would probably take Lagway here.
And there's no way to quantify this either. And each case is independent. I truly believe so. I'm not saying this will affect Sellers negatively at all, although we did see it in a bowl game where, it's been widely reported, and you'd have to believe it is the case that Sellers is probably one of the highest paid players in the entire country. The pressure that comes with that, fair or not, it's going to be viewed, I think, by a lot of people that he's carrying the team, or essentially South Carolina can only go as far as Sellers takes them. I mean, my God, he put the team on his back and beat Clemson. He may be asked to do that week in, week out as again, one of the highest paid players in the country. And if you go back and watch that Illinois game, I mean, they probably should have won it. But why didn't they? Because Sellers missed the throw. So I say all that to say, could you see a scenario where that, and again, this is not unique to Sellers, and I'm not naive to say that Lagway's not, he's probably making a equal or close to it, but that money could come in and negatively affect some of these guys.
Yeah, I do. I guess I kind of worry about that all the time. And I think one other factor I'm thinking here is I know South Carolina is going to have some experience back on the offensive line. Kind of think Florida might be a little bit better there next year on the offensive line. Jake Slaughter coming back. I really like, I think he's one of the better centers potentially in the country next season. So I think, yeah, that pressure to elevate, South Carolina. They were so good this year. They finished the season strong. Now they got to go into next season, try to take another step forward. There's even more pressure on him. There's pressure on Lagway too, but I think, you're looking at South Carolina as a playoff contender. It starts with Sellers elevating them. And it's a lot of pressure on his shoulders next year. So I do worry about that, and that plus the coordinator change and just making sure the offensive line and receiving core continue to get better next season. No Rocket Sanders either. So even more pressure on the backfield for him.
How about this one, Steven? So again, I've tried to uniquely pair all these quarterbacks. Ty Simpson, which I don't even know he's going to be the starter, but I'm just, that's an assumption there at Alabama, and Gunnar Stockton at Georgia. Now that may on the surface seem easy because we've seen Gunnar. He's got a little bit more experience. He's played in marquee games, but I certainly, even though I mock DeBoer, I got more confidence in DeBoer than I do Mike Bobo. And a lot of these Alabama guys are coming back. So again, we're assuming, at least I am, that Ty Simpson is a starting quarterback. If he is, and he was a borderline, or he may have been, he was like a 5-star prospect. So it's not like he doesn't have talent. Ty Simpson or Gunnar Stockton in their first years as starting quarterbacks, who do you think will be better?
I like Gunnar Stockton. I think the over kind of question with this one is Ty, how secure is Ty Simpson? Because you do have Austin Mack and you have Keelan Russell. It feels like unless Georgia brings in somebody, Gunnar Stockton is the guy. Now, I think I would agree with your point that I do trust DeBoer. I don't really trust Nick Sheridan as offensive coordinator at Alabama. So I trust DeBoer to get the most out of his quarterbacks in development leading up to the season. I think it's incumbent on Nick Sheridan to be a little bit better next year. But I think just kind of studying, these two teams, obviously Georgia's got some turnover along the offensive line. They're going to have to run the ball a lot better next year. They can't be 14th, 15th in the SEC. I think for Alabama, the good news so far has been you're bringing back Jeremy Bernard. You got Ryan Williams in place, Isaiah Horton, the receiver transfer from Miami, pretty good foundation on the offensive line. So it feels like, we saw this year 2 at Washington. DeBoer's offense really took off. Once they got the pieces in place and they settled in, I think you could see this offense taking a step forward if they can find the right quarterback. To be honest with you, I don't know how I feel about Ty Simpson yet, so that's why I kind of went with Gunnar Stockton. Big game experience already against Texas and Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm. And maybe this isn't fair because I'm not asking you this of all these quarterbacks, but let's assume Ty Simpson and Gunnar Stockton, or I mean, it didn't even have to be them, but whoever it is, if they're not All-American types, if they're not the best quarterback in the SEC, can these teams still win the national championship? Because we have seen in years past, Alabama can do it. Stetson Bennett was criminally underrated. I don't know if he was the best quarterback in the SEC, but he was pretty close. So, but that's the question. In this new age of NIL transfer portal, can Alabama, can Georgia, can they still win a national championship if they do not have elite quarterback play?
I think so. And I think we can kind of look at this year as an example. It's not a knock on any of the quarterbacks at all, but Quinn Ewers, Will Howard, Drew Aller, the guys that played, and Riley Leonard, the guys that played in the semifinals, none of those guys would be on the list of All-Americans this season. And so I think when, certainly, and even going back, JJ McCarthy at Michigan last year, really good player, but maybe not an elite, statistical dominant force every week. So I think they're I don't want to call them game managers, but I feel like if you rock solid, take care of the ball, make the efficiency on passing downs, and you play with your good defense, I think you can win a national title, especially Alabama and Georgia, where you have an immense amount of roster talent that can overwhelm a lot of these teams when you get to the playoff.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a wise answer. That's why we have you on this show. All right, Steven, how about this one? This one I thought, oh, buddy. This one I thought was too good not to even conjure up a question here. John Mateer, who apparently he's the second coming of Joe Burrow, or no, excuse me, Baker Mayfield, my mistake, or Jackson Arnold at Auburn. Who's better just next year? Again, that's all this is. Next year, new teams for both these quarterbacks. Who do you think has a better season?
So right now, I'm going to take John Mateer. My answer may change a little bit later this offseason when we do the quarterback rankings. I'm gonna study up a little bit more on Mateer after watching him at Washington State and want to watch him a little bit closer. So I don't feel great about this answer. I know that's a very convincing way to settle a debate here. Is I tell you I don't feel good about it, but I think if you're making the optimistic case here for Oklahoma, they can't have that many receivers get hurt in one season again, right? Like that just seems statistically like improbable to have that many injuries. So with the portal additions and Deion Burks coming back, plus maybe Bed and Ball working some magic on the offensive line, plus a quarterback and OC who are basically meshed together, it feels like Oklahoma will be improved. On that being said, I do think, and this is what makes it tough, I don't think Jackson Arnold got the most out of his talent at Oklahoma. And I think going to Auburn with that supporting cast they're going to have, and they should have a pretty solid offensive line too. I think he is statistically going to take a massive step forward this year. So this kind of gets at the whole argument, I think, next year in the SEC is like, if these two guys are in the middle of the quarterback debate, that says to me this is a pretty good year for quarterbacks in the SEC.
Mm-hmm. Well, Oklahoma needed a boost. Auburn needed a boost. So they went to the portal and got it. And if you need a boost, not you, Steven, but the Cousins, if you need a boost, check out tryjoymode.com. What is this joy mode? This is Shane's favorite. It's a sexual performance booster, Steven, all natural supplement. That's why Cousin Shane's not here, in case you haven't figured it out. He got his hands on his joy mode. I've not heard from him in about 48 hours. He's having such a good time over here. All natural supplement designed to enhance blood flow, keep you good for when you need it. Promo code SEC for 20% off a single purchase or 30% off a subscription service over at Try Joy Mode. Again, just mix it with some water. And in 45 minutes, it's Joy Mode time over there for you and the missus. So again, start a subscription, get 30% off, or just a one-time order, get 20% off at tryjoymode.com. Promo code SEC. And hopefully, when Shane's Joy Mode's worn out, he will return to this show. But I can't make any promises. I mean, it's that good of a product, according to Cousin Shane. You know what?
Man, it's only appropriate that ad read comes up after the Auburn team discussion.
Waited it just for you, Hugh. If you're out there listening, get you some. We know you could use it. Now I didn't know, Steven. I didn't know where in the world to put Bo Pribula because again, I don't know much about him aside from some highlights. I need to go back and watch Penn State, but you kind of answered this question. But with John Mateer and maybe even Jackson Arnold, where is it at all possible that Bo is equal or better than? I mean, is that a total swing that he, if in a dream scenario, that he's better than either one of those guys?
I think he can be. Like, I think there's reason for optimism with all these guys, and there's reasons to be worried about each one of them. And I think if you're just looking at Mateer versus Pribula, he's never been a full-time passer. No, Bo Pribula, has never been a full-time passer. Never attempted more than 13 passes in a game at Penn State. And he was more of a change of pace quarterback behind Drew Aller. So I think the question is going to be like, how does he take that and become a full-time starter? And I think you kind of have to trust like Kirby Moore and Eli Drinkowitz, they're going to do everything to get him acclimated and also to fit the offense around his strengths. So I'm pretty optimistic that he can take that step forward as a full-time starter. But I think in this debate, I think you got to go with Mateer. He's just more proven, very dynamic at Washington State. I don't know how that necessarily translates down in the SEC. I think he'll probably have a little bit harder time replicating those stats at Washington State, at Oklahoma. But I just think a little bit more proven at this point. He's done it for a full season. I'll take Mateer.
Okay, how about this one, Steven? And again, we don't even know who the quarterback's going to be at Kentucky, so I'm saying Zach Calzada or Cutter Bulliet. You can pick either one against Blake Shapen, who I assume, but man, correct me if I'm wrong, Steven. I mean, he's been banged up 2 years in a row, so fingers crossed. Going back to his time at Baylor, fingers crossed he stays healthy. I think he'll be the guy. He'll put up probably insane numbers because it's Jeff Lebby. But if it's not him, Luke Cromenhook, however you say that, the transfer, so again, we're picking one of the Mississippi State, one of the Kentucky. Who do you think is poised to have a better season?
I like the Mississippi State side of this. I think, first of all, when you look at their, just from a scheme standpoint and coaching, I would take Jeff Lebby over Bush Hamden in this scenario. And also, yes, Mississippi State lost a couple guys, Mario Craver, Kevin Coleman, but they brought in 5 receivers from the portal to help restock that group. I kind of almost trust that Lebby is going to be able to get enough out of that offense, and that includes whether it's Shapen or Cromenhoek. Shapen got off to a pretty good start this year. I think he had 8 touchdowns to 1 or 2 picks before he got hurt. Cromenhoek, I will say, Florida State was very high on him. A lot of fans that I talked to at Florida State, very high on him. Did not want to lose him to the portal. The offensive changes there, I think, kind of made him reconsider what was going on at Florida State. So the future could look very bright, but I think the now also looks bright too with Blake Shapen at the controls next year if he can stay healthy.
Mm-hmm. All right, how about again? This was a tough one, Steven, because I just these players are so different from one another. But I kind of how I shaped it was returning starters, proven themselves, undoubted starters, and could be 2 of the biggest names in the conference next season. Garrett Nussmeier, LSU, of course, and Diego Pavia, Vanderbilt. Who would you rather? And they'll go face off once again next season. So that's another reason I went with it. Who has a better season next year? Garrett Nussmeier, Diego Pavia?
I like Garrett Nussmeier. I think Diego Pavia is certainly very high on my list of returning quarterbacks in the SEC next year, but I'm going to take Nussmeier. I think, first of all, motivation certainly there. First of all, because he could be one of the first picks in the 2026 NFL draft. A lot of quarterbacks. It's not necessarily a great year for quarterbacks this year. It could be next year if he takes that step forward and along with some of the other guys. So 1 year through as a starter, I think he just naturally takes a step forward in his second season. Plus, I mentioned it earlier, but I like what they did in the portal. They went out and got a couple tight ends. They've restocked the offensive line with 2 starters coming in, and Nick Anderson and Barry and Brown. They've kind of fortified the weapons around him. Would love to see them try to run the ball a little bit better next year with the running backs, try to take some of the pressure off of that. Pavia, I don't know if this makes any sense. He might be one of the most valuable players in the country too, just because Vandy's going to go as he goes. And you could pick several others, but it feels like the drop off between Pavia and the backup at Vanderbilt next year versus some of these other teams is pretty steep. If Pavia is injured, Vanderbilt's hopes of a bowl game are going to be significantly diminished. But I think in this debate, I have to go with Nussmeier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Diego, it's almost disrespectful to call him a quarterback because he's just it's like a linebacker. He's like old Brett Favre back here before he started stealing from welfare people. But he's like a linebacker playing football. You know what I mean? He'll block for you. He'll do everything. He's just a football player that can throw and has got incredible heart. So I'm gonna disagree with you. I go Pavia just because I love the guy. All right, how about again? I didn't quite know where to fit these 2, but I think they're somewhat similar. I just saw someone in the comments saying, "My God, you got Austin Simmons low." We're not doing it in order of greatness or anything like that. But Austin Simmons, assuming Jackson Dart's not back at Ole Miss, versus Taylon Green at Arkansas. These legitimately could be the best two quarterbacks in the SEC next. That would not stun me in the least if they can live up to their potential and in the offenses they're playing in. So this was a tough one. That's why I'm asking you, Steven, Austin Simmons or Taylor Green?
Man, this is really tough. This is actually probably the one that I struggled the most with of these picks, is trying to decide how high I like Austin Simmons and Taylor Green next year. I think right now, I'm going to be a little bold. I'm going to take Austin Simmons here. I think the Ole Miss offense, I know there's a lot of receivers, and certainly they're going to have some turnover, offensive line, running back. Kind of just trust Kiffin. I know it's dangerous to bet on small sample sizes, but man, that drive against Georgia was nice. And of course, from behind the scenes and recruiting, like everything about Austin Simmons says he could be the next like big time quarterback at Ole Miss. So obviously the production and the provenness is there with Taylor Green, but if I'm banking at the end of the year, I probably would just take a flyer on Austin Simmons here.
Mm-hmm. And then I didn't mean to, cast this guy aside or anything, but Marcel Reed, I didn't quite know where to put him, so I just said against Taylor Green as well. Physically different prospects, but both in year two with an offensive system starting in the SEC. Taylor Green or Marcel Reed?
I took Taylor Green here. It is very close, though. I think if you want to make the case for Marcel Reed, and I think you and I have talked a lot about Texas A&M the last couple of weeks and what they did in the portal, improving significantly at receiver. Like, you now have the receivers to give Marcel Reed a better chance to succeed through the air each week. And also, for a guy that had to jump in the bowl game, he had to jump into the lineup last year and take over in some really difficult spots. I never got the sense that he was overwhelmed. Like, I think there's another level that he can get to. I think on Taylor Green, there is another level too. And I think that's the question for me, is like, what's the jump in this second year under Petrino with some new faces at receiver that they brought in through the portal, with a couple of like 3 or 4 of their top guys departing. Also, if you want to look like below the metrics too, Taylor Green was 3rd in the SEC last year in the most air yards by a quarterback. That's actually like not the short stuff, that's the long stuff by the air yards. So that's good for the metrics conversation on Taylor Green. So this one is close. I like the supporting cast upgrades for Marcel Reed, but I think right now I'd probably go Taylor Green.
Well, all right. Well, now that again, I feel bad throwing Marcel and Diego at the end here. So let me, and there may be a little bit more similar prospects. Of those two, who do you think will have a better season? Diego Pavia, Vanderbilt, Marcel Reed, A&M?
Got to go Diego Pavia here. I also huge to get Eli Stowers back at tight end next year. I think very underrated nationally. But if you start thinking about like we talked about like the importance of Pavia to that Vanderbilt team, what he can do on the ground and also what he can do through the air. It's almost, sometimes you watch him, it's almost like a triple option attack with the fakes and all the motion and stuff. I think Pavia his 3rd season, I guess, under Tim Beck. And so I would take Pavia in that case.
And I apologize, Steven, I didn't ask you this, but I was just thinking it while we were going through. Are there maybe 1 or 2 of these guys, any of them that we listed, that you are most confident about will, in a sense of like, even if it's like you think they're going to be great or they're going to be awful, that you are most confident that you have a really good read on, and then maybe is there 1 or 2 that you're least confident that you have a feel for how productive they'll be next season, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, I think Prabula and Mateer are the 2 that I would say are probably like the most wild cards for me, like trying to figure out like the SEC next season, and some of the early stuff is like, how do you feel about them? Probably dictates how you want to rank those 2 teams for next season. I think it's probably cheating to say like Lagway and Arch. I feel really good about. So Austin Simmons, I think, would be in that conversation. I also think I feel really, really good about Garrett Nussmeier taking that next step. And also I feel good about Jackson Arnold maybe being the most improved quarterback in the conference next year.
You Free's going to love to hear that. Oh, Jackson Arnold.
Gotta love that supporting cast at receiver for next year for Auburn, like Cam Coleman, Eric Singleton. With the receivers they have, maybe that might be one of the better receiving cores in the country next season.
Shout out cousin Mike Andrews. I think he's an Oklahoma fan. I'm not sure. Hugh Freeze week 1. I have to tell Jackson Arnold not to throw the ball, kind of like he did throwing all his Auburn quarterbacks under the bus last offseason. If that happens, this is gonna be old Hugh's last year up there, because again, no excuses. You're paying millions of dollars for your quarterback, and this is your handpicked one. You win a little. Again, I think Jackson Arnold could be awesome. I also think they rushed a little bit the portal just to ensure they secured one. I don't know. That's gonna be the $1 million question all off season at Auburn.
Oh, no question about it. I mean, just based upon what Auburn has coming back, and I think also you look at some of the games that they played and how some like one-score games and turnovers can flip easily from one year to the next. Like they should not be missing out on a bowl game next year. At the very bare minimum, just getting to a bowl game should be the goal. Frankly, the goal should be a top 25 team because they probably have enough talent to be in there. But you mentioned something on Hugh Freeze in the kind of stakes for next season. But I'm just thinking, with Oklahoma, with some of these other teams, we'll see. I think Billy Napier is probably going to be fine. Sam Pittman, we'll see. There's a guy that's got like some SEC ties. He's doing pretty well at Tulane. I know he's a Kentucky guy, but John Summerall's got a lot of ties to the state of Alabama too. And if this thing doesn't go well, I mean, I think he's probably going to be on everybody's short list in the SEC, and that being John Summerall, of course, the head coach at Tulane.
Right. Yeah. The race for Summerall. Let it begin here. You know what?
Yeah. That's this is like, it's like being the first pick of the NFL draft. Like you don't necessarily want to be there, but you can maybe upgrade it head coach. I think there's a pretty good chance Auburn's going to be in a lot of preseason top 25s. I think just given the talent and also, like I said, some of the close games and stuff, weird injuries and turnovers probably flip in their favor next year.
Yeah. Well, Steven, we've gotten well over an hour here. Unless you got anything. Tony with some breaking news here. I want to double check it. I've been got before. You got anything else, Steven, before we hop off the line?
I got one little hopeful nugget for all the good cousins out there. I am working on my early top 25 for next year, and it should be out sometime this week up at Athlon Sports. So hopefully would ask that all the cousins check it out. Even if you disagree, try to share it, interact. Would love to get the ball rolling on some early top 2025 conversation.
Yeah, no, I can't wait to check that out. But it looks like the breaking news was not so breaking, so we can rest easy. I don't want to share false information. It's about Quinn Ewers, who has not made a decision. But I think that's the one we're all waiting for, isn't it?
It is. I wasn't totally surprised that Carson Beck transferred to Miami. I mean, if you just kind of did the simple math on teams that needed a quarterback, there was one team that was incredibly desperate and had a lot of cash to throw at somebody, and Ewers and Beck were the two most obvious candidates for Miami to throw around some cash. But he's kind of the last domino in all this, unless anybody on the playoff teams, the remaining playoff teams from the semifinals or championship wants to transfer. Like Julian Sayin is in line to start next year. If he was to transfer for whatever reason, certainly that would be a shakeup. But I think by far, barring any kind of chaos in the spring, Ewers is the big kind of unknown at the quarterback spot for transfers.
Right. And we're still waiting to hear Jackson Dart, things of that nature. If he get his waiver, I don't know what's going on with that, but whatever it is, we'll be on top of it. We'll be breaking it all down on the channel. Steven, can't thank you enough for checking us out. Can you give your social media before you go as well?
Absolutely. You can follow me on Twitter at AthlonSteven. I'm over at athlonsports.com for all of the articles, rankings, predictions, all that stuff. And Steven L. CFB over on Facebook and Instagram.
All right, Steven, I thank you so much for taking all this time. I thank each and every one of you for hanging out. We'll catch you on the next one.
Hey, buddy, this beer's for you, Mike, and Cousin Shane. That SEC podcast loves the Pirate, and the Pirate loves that SEC podcast. Hail State.